Good evening, and welcome to another edition of Pop Culture Junkies. I'm your host, Dan Stokes. The MLB has a 162-game season, plus 2 months of spring training and postseason play. Although these months are filled with excitement, the offseason might be the best. Besides the numerous awards handed out, the offseason gives teams a chance to add a piece to compete for a championship or to rebuild for the future. Here to talk with me is Vito Malacari. All right, so Vito, how do you feel that, your withdrawal symptoms of the MLB is?
Great thing about the MLB is, like you said, with the hot stove in the off season, there's always something going on. But missing games, not every night tuning in at 7 o'clock to watch a Yankee game or any game really, it hurts. I can't wait for April 4th or April 3rd. It starts, Yankees start on the 4th, but I can't wait for it to be back, Dan.
I couldn't agree more. It just feels like there's a void, I'd come home and I'd always look forward to a game, but now it's like, what do I watch? I feel like a piece of me is missing. My baseball identity is missing, and I can't wait for the season to start. But luckily, we're, excited for the offseason here, and there's been a lot of moves so far and a lot of things to look forward to with the commissioner and the MVP award being handed out and all the other awards. So it's a really fun time. So how do you feel about the recent moves that have been made, such as like the Andrelton Simmons deal to the Angels and Kimbrel to the Red Sox?
Well, let's start off with Simmons. I like that deal for the Angels. They get younger. They get really the best defensive player in baseball probably all around. His range is phenomenal, great arm, and he had a down year with the stick, but he's an okay hitter. I think he'll hit okay in that lineup. But just to look at the Angels for say, I think they need a little more offense. And Simmons compared to Ibar, who they traded, isn't really that big of a difference. So I like the Simmons trade for them. And for the Red Sox, I know I may be a little biased as a Yankee fan, but that trade doesn't make a lot of sense to me unless they go out and get a few front-end starters. Because what they're running out there now is a lot of 2s, 3s, and 4s. And a great piece at the back end of your bullpen isn't going to win you games.
Has witnessed the first 3 qualifying offers ever signed in its 3 years since they started the qualifying offers since its inception 3 years ago. And we saw Colby Rasmus be the first to sign with Houston. The second was Matt Wieters, a catcher, signing with the Orioles, and Brett Anderson, a left-handed pitcher, signing with the Dodgers. So what's your take on, all 3 of the signings?
To start with Anderson, Brett Anderson always had a lot of talent, especially when he was with Oakland, but he always faced injuries. And this is the first year in many years that he's pitched a full season. So in his case, I think he figures pitched well this year, very well for, his standards, and then maybe put together another good year this year and then go out on the free agent market and sign a nice contract, maybe 3-4 years, because you're not going to see teams give him a ton of years just because his durability problems that he's had in the past. To look at Wieters makes sense coming off of Tommy John surgery. Didn't catch back-to-back days all year. He was one day the catcher, the next day the DH with Caleb Joseph being the catcher. Switch hitting, catcher, you don't see those a lot. Power hitter, hits for average as well. So he's one of those guys that if he could put together a good year this year, which I think is his age 30 year, which is surprising, he could go out to the free agent market next year and then sign a nice contract. And Colby Rasmus, he's one of those players you just don't know what you're going to get. He has a lot of talent, especially when he started off in St. Louis. He started off very strong, and then he tailed off, and then he didn't get along with management too much. So they shipped him over to Toronto, where he didn't excel too much, even in that hitter's ballpark. But you have to remember, Toronto's offense wasn't, well, it was still good at that time, but it wasn't what it was this past year with the additions of Donaldson and Tulowitzki.
Phenomenal. Even Colabello, a project like that, a guy 31, 32 years old, and he was able to have the season he did.
And to Colabello, he's someone that the Twins gave up on him, which I'm surprised because it was just a few years ago.
He had that phenomenal first month of April. He had like 30 RBIs. Yeah. Like, it set an MLB record.
And then you didn't hear about him for a while. The Twins gave up on him, and then he had a very good year with the Blue Jays this year.
I think Rasmus, it makes perfect sense for him to sign the deal. For all 3 men who signed the deal, it makes perfect sense. Rasmus, he didn't have a phenomenal season. His postseason what really got him the contract, and it makes great sense for Houston to do that. He'll hit about 20 home runs in that ballpark, and he has higher than exceptional defense. So that's something you really want. the sabermetrics now, that's something teams pay a lot more attention to. How many runs is he going to save me? How many outfield assists? And Rasmus, to me, I always felt he was a good outfielder, but with Houston, I think that's even better. But the only thing he known. So it's interesting, but we'll see how A.J. Hinch handles that. Matt Wieters, I think he's a phenomenal catcher. It's unfortunate that he had Tommy John surgery, but I really think he's going to get back to throwing runners out, and he's going to hit bombs. I mean, the only thing, though, that I'm nervous for is, say he has such a great season with the Orioles next year and decides to go to free agency. I don't know if the ballpark he goes to is going to be able to, his power numbers are going to follow.
Well, Camden Yards is a bandbox.
It's a bandbox.
Anyone could hit home runs there. I mean, it's really pretty small all over the place. Left center field is kind of a joke, to be honest with you. You hit a high pop and it's gone. But you're right. His power numbers might not transfer over to other ballparks. But
it's like Robinson Cano with the Mariners.
But I think if you're signing Wieters to hit you 280 and about 15 to 20 and driving RBIs as a catcher, those are pretty good numbers.
And have a high throw-out rate. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, throw out 35%, which is a high rate, but to throw out somewhere around there, I mean, that's a pretty solid catcher.
Move we saw was the Jeremy Hellickson trade to the Phillies. Kind of a shocking trade from, between the Diamondbacks and the Phillies. Not typical, trade partners. How do you feel about that?
I think it's one of those with Hellickson where the Phillies make the trade, take on some salary, and look for him to have a really good first half of the year, and then maybe trade him at the deadline for some prospects. Remember, he only has 1 year left on his contract for $4.5 million roughly. So, and the Phillies aren't going anywhere this year. They know that. They know they're in rebuilding mode. So the Hellickson trade doesn't surprise me in a sense where they're going to use him to their advantage, hopefully, if he has that good first half, and then maybe get a nice prospect. You're not going to get too much for him because, he hasn't been consistent over the years, but former Rookie of the Year, which we talked about earlier, so he has the potential to be a very good pitcher. Another guy with a changeup, the Rays, when they build their pitchers, they love them to have the changeup. So we'll see if that turns out well for them, but I think Hellickson's really going to be somebody that they try to flip for some prospects throughout the year.
See, that makes a lot of sense, the way the Phillies are now that Ruben Amaro is not the GM anymore. But I also feel they could use him as a bridge, possibly. Maybe mentor the younger starting pitchers. Because he's been around. He hasn't been around all too long, but he has experience. He has pitched in the postseason with the Rays. So it should be very interesting how they go. It's also, too, now with the qualifying offers, this is going to change the draft. Because normally, what if another team signs someone who declines a free agent, declines a qualifying offer, per se, they get the compensation pick in the draft. So now those are three teams, where are they going to sign? So the draft order is going to be shaken up, and who knows by now? Because you have guys who have compensation picks, like when the Yankees signed Mark Teixeira. They gave the pick, and it turned out to be Mike Trout to the Angels.
Yeah, that one.
So those picks could bite, but that's the thing you got to love about the draft. You're in a win-now mode. That's the risk you have to take, but we'll see how this draft unfolds.
Yeah, the Trout one still stings a little bit, even though the Yankees got that World Series that first year after Teixeira. But you see a lot of teams scared off by that compensation pick. Maybe will not sign a player because they don't want to lose their first-round pick. Especially talked about the Cubs before, and you look at the Royals who just won the World Series. Those guys are all homegrown talent.
Yeah.
So it just shows how much the draft in baseball has become such a bigger deal to organizations. Usually, back in the day, if you want to call it that, the draft didn't mean much. The scouts, you didn't know what you were getting, especially with the difference between aluminum and wooden bats. You didn't know what kind of hitter you were getting. But nowadays, it's going to be teams. They really fight themselves on giving up that draft pick. So to have Ian Kennedy, for say, who's a free agent and has that draft pick compensation attached to him, it might be tough for him to get a deal just because of the draft pick that's attached to him that team would eventually lose to the Padres.
That's all the time we have for today. Thank you, Vito, and thank you for joining us on Pop Culture Junkies. I'm your host, Dan Stokes. Have a great night.